hand out the sheets? You hand out the sheets? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful. It's very special to be learning here together. Again, before Rosh Hashanah, we began Slichot last night, and we continue the preparation, taking it to the next level. When we think about Rosh Hashanah, so I think there's some imagery, there's some symbolism that many of us have in our minds. And I certainly do. From the time, I think, when we were kids, when we started learning about it, and in some ways it stays a little bit simplistic. I don't know about you, but I think of Rosh Hashanah, we think about these books, these great heavenly volumes that are being opened up and the names are being inscribed. We think about these giant scales that are up there in the sky somewhere. They even have them on the front of some of the machzorim. They have the picture. You've got the scales of the mitzvot on the one side, the averot on the other side. It's simplistic imagery, but Chazal used it as well. And if we think about it, we think about these images and think about the symbolism, try and look at it from a bit of a deeper perspective. I think there's a lot it has to teach us to understand really the essence of what these days are about. But we can dig a little bit deeper into these scales, into these books. Obviously, there are not these great big books up somewhere in the sky, but there's a deeper message in there. So if you have the sheet in front of you, which Mark is handing out, I think just about everybody's got them. So we're on source number 1. Everybody has the sheet? More. Okay, they're on their way. But I'll read it out in the meantime until you get it. Hopefully everybody will have the sheet soon. Source number 1, we have the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara, towards the end of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, says the following. It says, Amar Rabbi Abau, אמרו מלאכי השרת לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא ריבונו של עולם מפני מה אין ישראל אומרים שירה לפניך בראש שנה וביום הכיפורים. So we mentioned last night, those who were here, one of the reasons we began saying Slichot last night, one of the reasons we begin saying straight after Shabbat, is that there is an element of Oneg Shabbat. There's an element of the simcha, of the joy that we take from Shabbat, and we want to bring that with us into the Slichot. These days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are Yamim Tovim. Discussions in Halakha, to what extent, how great that goes, to what extent do we have the mitzvah of Simchat Yom Tov, if at all, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But along with the fear, the dread, the trepidation, there is an element of Simcha on these days. And so therefore, the angels, no less than the Malachei HaSharet, the angels ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, they say, surely today, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, these are days on which it is appropriate for Am Yisrael to sing Shirah. These are days on which they should be saying Hallel. Every Yom Tov we say Hallel. Why should Rosh Hashanah be different? So answers HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Amar lahem, if Shamelech Yoshev al Kisei Din, V'sifrei Chaim v'sifrei Meitim ptuchim lefanav, can it be? The king is sitting in judgment. He is sitting on the throne and he is judging the books. Sifrei Chaim v'sifrei Meitim, the books of life and the books of death, are open in front of him. V'Yisrael umim shirah. No, take a step back. Simcha to a point. If the books of life and death are open, this is not the time. And so I brought this Gemara because I want to dwell a little bit on this idea of these books. What are these books of Sifrei Chaim and Sifrei Meitim? So there are those who understand. There are those who interpret that we should say Sifrei Chaim and Sifrei Meitim does not mean the books of life and death, but it means the books of the living and the books of the dead. The Chatam Sofer writes that Kivyachol, as it were, the Meitim, those who have already passed on in some way, the Neshamot are with us together in Shul when we're daven on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's not just the Chaim that are judged on these days, it's the Meitim are judged again as well. The ripple effects, the consequences of our actions, the things that we've done, which continue to impact and continue to affect even after we're gone. That is one interpretation. That's not the direction I want to go in right now. But that is Sifrei Chaim and Sifrei Meitim. But if we think about what are these books are in our tefillot, we say it. In Avinu Malkeinu, which we won't say this year the first day, Rosh Hashanah, it's Shabbat, but we'll say the second day. We'll say throughout the Aseret Yomei Tshuva, Avinu Malkeinu Kotvenu, B'Sefer Chaim Tovim, Kotvenu B'Sefer Geula V'Yeshua, Kotvenu B'Sefer Parnasa V'Chalkala. Many different books, many different things that we hope for, many different things that we are praying for. Rabbi Wein discussed. And we have a source in the Gemara which tells us there seem to be many books, but there are at least three. There are at least these three books in which our verdict is written, so to speak. And again, it's obviously not meant to be taken literally, but we have to understand what it means. Source number 2 on the sheets, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Daf Tet Zayin Amud Bet. I think it's safe to say this is a well-known Gemara. If it's not, by the end of the shir it will be. Amar Rabbi Krosbedai, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Shlosha Sfarim Niftachim B'Rosh Hashanah. We know there are 3 books. 3 books that are opened up on Rosh Hashanah. I'm going to read through this Gemara. The truth is that on just about every word here in this Gemara, there are perushim upon perushim, machlokot, different ways to understand. There's not a single word here that's not without disagreement. Let's try and understand on a simple level. It says, Shlosha Sfarim, there are 3 books that are opened up. Echad shel Shaim Gmurim, v'echad shel Tzadikim Gmurim. There is one of the completely wicked. There is one book of the completely righteous. It's interesting as well why the Gemara chooses to say Tzadikim Gmurim, Rashaim Gmurim. Just a Tzadik or a Rasha, wouldn't that be enough? Completely righteous, completely wicked. V'echad shel Beinonim. And in the 3rd book is the one of the Beinonim. Everybody else who falls in between. So if I stop at this point and I ask you, where would most people fit? Which category would you think most people would fit in? So we have Rishaim Gmurim, completely wicked people. They exist, but they're few and far between. You have Tzadikim Gmurim, you have completely righteous people. Again, they exist. Yechidei Skula, they're out there, but they're few and far between. And then you have Beinonim. That's just about everybody else. Hold that thought. At this point, I want to suggest that most people, most of the human race, fits into this category of Beinonim. So what happens to these people? What gets written in the books? Tzadikim Gmurim Nichtavim V'Nechtamim La'alta L'Chaim. On Rosh Hashanah, this takes place. The Tzadikim straight away are signed and sealed for life. Rishaim Gmurim, the completely wicked, Nichtavim Nechtamim La'alta L'Mita, signed and sealed immediately for death. Beinonim Tluyim V'Omdim. Everybody else, most of us, are hanging in the balance. Tluyim V'Omdim, literally hanging. Me Rosh Hashanah v'ad Yom Kippur, from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, for these 10 days. Zachu Nichtavim L'Chaim, Lo Zachu Nichtavim L'Mita. At the end of 10 days, comes Yom Kippur, all the appeals are over, there has to be a decision. Either for life or for death, it's one or the other. So there are a lot of questions to be raised here. Again, when we learn this on a simplistic, superficial level, 3 books, life, death, righteous, wicked, okay. But when we start thinking about it deeper, many, many questions. One question which immediately jumps to mind, I'm sure many of you are thinking about or have thought about. It's a question Tosfot asks on the daf. And the question is this true? I mean, it's not true. We know it's not true. Look at the world. Look at our experience. Is it correct to say that only people that are completely righteous live and only people that are completely wicked die? That's not what happens. That's not the way the world functions. So many, many answers are suggested in the Rishonim. There are those who say when the Gemara says life, it doesn't mean life the way we think of life. There are those who say when it says tzadikim, it says righteous, it says wicked, it doesn't mean righteous or wicked the way we think of righteous and the wicked. There are those who suggest, based on another Gemara, that every person has a certain pre-allocated allotment, a number of years. Nobody knows how many they have. But that's one thing. And then when it talks about life or death, if it's beyond that pre-allocated allotment, so then it will be, as I say, many, many different answers suggested. It's not our topic right now, but it's impossible to read the Gemara without at least mentioning that idea. That's one difficulty. I think there's another difficulty here which is raised, which is, what is the Sefer Beinonim? What's it for? For 10 days. So you've got 3 books. It's decided on Rosh Hashanah that's completely righteous, again, which is a minimum amount of people, as we currently understand it, are being written in the book for life. The completely wicked are being written in the book for death. Most people are written in this third book, but that book, after 10 days, that book is closed and the names are moved to one or the other. So why do you need the Sefer Beinonim for 10 days? Well, they have to keep track somewhere. They lost the record, don't know where to put the names. So Rav Charlap says something. Rav Charlap over here says that that's a misunderstanding. That's not what the Gemara says. It's not that the Sefer Beinonim is closed after 10 days. He says on Rosh Hashanah, everybody is allocated to one of these three books. The book of Tzadikim, the book of Rishaim, the book of Beinonim. If you get written in the book of Beinonim on Rosh Hashanah, you stay in the book of Beinonim the entire year. Whether you're going to live, whether you're going to die, that's a technicality that gets sorted out later. But there's a judgment here that gets, if somebody's a Beinoni on Rosh Hashanah, they've been decided they're a Beinoni. So Moshe Shiva used to tell us that he always used to mention this drasha during Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. People used to say to him, well, why didn't you tell us before Rosh Hashanah? It's Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, now there's nothing we can do. So I'm telling you before Rosh Hashanah, we can make sure that we get into the book of Tzadikim and not get into the book of Beinonim, hopefully. But the truth is, as we've said, most people seem to fit here into the book of Beinonim. The next Gemara, which we'll see, says that even if we aren't in the category of Beinonim, a person should view themselves as such during these 10 days. You may as well. Nobody knows where they've been written. But you may as well see yourself as a Beinoni. Because if you're a tzaddik, so you probably don't think of yourself as a tzaddik. And you think you're a tzaddik, it's probably the sign that you're not. If you're a Rasha, so there's nothing to do. It's finished. The only people who've got any work to do in these 10 days are the Beinonim. So view yourself as if you're in the book of Beinonim, maybe even if you're not. But the way we understand at this point, and we want to know, if we are in the book of Beinonim, how can we merit the first part of the sentence, Zachu nichtavim l'chaim, and not chas v'chalila, the second part. So we have to define our terms. What is a Beinoni? Who is a Beinoni? What makes somebody a Beinoni? And if they are a Beinoni, how can they become a tzaddik? So here we go to source number 3, the next Gemara Masechet Kiddushin. And the Gemara says the following, we alluded to it briefly last night. It says, Tanu Rabbanan le'olam yir'eh adam atzmo ke'ilu chetzio chayav v'chetzio zakai. This is what I mentioned. A person should always view themselves. Le'olam. A person should always view themselves in this way. And the Rambam will tell us, particularly during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But always. View yourself as if you are. We've got our scales. We've got those big golden heavenly scales up in the sky. Right? They are perfectly poised. They are perfectly balanced. It's 50-50. Chetzio chayav v'chetzio zakai. Asa mitzvah achat, ashrav she'echlei atzmo lakaf zchut. And therefore, if everything is 50-50, if everything is perfectly balanced in the middle, all you have to do is one thing. Just do one thing. Asa mitzvah achat, ashrav she'echlei atzmo lakaf zchut. You've performed one mitzvah, one good deed. You've learned one word of Torah. You've done one good deed for somebody else. That's it. You have now gone over to the side of kaf zchut. You've tipped the scales in the right direction. Avar avera achat, chas v'chalila, the opposite. You've done an avera. Oilo she'echlei atzmo lekaf chova. You've tipped the scales to the wrong side. And it brings psukim to back it up. Have a look now, the third line of source number 3. Third word of the third line. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon omer lefi she'haolam nidon achar rubo v'yachid nidon achar rubo. We mentioned this last night. It's not just about me. It's not just about the individual here. It's about the entire world. Now in bold again, asa mitzvah achat, ashrav she'echlei atzmo v'et kol ha'olam lakaf zchut. If you do one mitzvah, understand it's not just that you've tipped the scales for you. You've tipped the scales for your community, for your country, for your people, for the entire world. The entire world will now survive. The entire world will be signed for good because of that one action which you did. Avar avera achat, but if on the contrary you did an avera, oilo she'echlei atzmo v'et kol ha'olam lekaf chova. This is a pretty weighty responsibility. שנאמר וחוטא אחד וכולי, בשביל חטא יחידי שעשה זה, עבד ממנו ומכל העולם טובה הרבה. So very interesting, a very descriptive Gemara. We remember at the beginning, the Gemara says, Yireh adam atzmo ke'ilu. This is just an exercise, this is a thought exercise. It can't really be that way, that everything is 50-50, and that one action will change it, or maybe it can. And the other question I want to ask is this. Based on this Gemara, and we'll see the Rambam, this is how he seems to, in the third parak of Ilchot Shuvah, seems to take these two Gemarot and combine them and explain them. We'll read it in a few moments. But this Gemara gives us a definition of the tzaddikim, the Roshaim, and the Beinonim, which we saw in the previous Gemara. The Rios, who is a Beinoni? Beinoni literally means in between, one and the other. It means this is the person who is chetzio zakai v'chetzio chayav. We go back to our scales. You've got half of the things you've done are good and half of the things you've done are bad. And one thing, one action now is going to tip the scales. Now the Rambam points out, if you have a look, source number 4, halacha bet, just the line in the middle of halacha bet, which is in bold. He says, Shikul ze eino lefi minyan hazchuyot ve'avonot, ela lefi godlam. We understand it, and it has to be this way. It's not just that, I've done 53 mitzvot and 52 averot. The mitzvot happen to be, giving tzedakah or whatever it is, and the averot are murder and idolatry. It doesn't work that way. They're weighted. There are certain mitzvot which are going to be qualitatively greater, certain averot which are going to be qualitatively greater. So it doesn't mean you've done the exact same amount, but on balance, when it's weighted out, it still goes according to the number of mitzvot, the number of averot, with their cumulative effect. That's going to be 50-50. Now let's think about this. We started off saying most people in the world are Beinonim. Most people are not tzaddikim gmurim, are not rashaim gmurim. They're Beinonim, they're in the middle, half and half. Now we have the definition of what the Beinoni is, which is that half of the things that you've done are on the side of good, half of the things you've done are on the side of bad. Chetzio zakai v'chetzio chayav. How likely is it that if we weigh up all the different deeds that a person has done, all the actions that you've taken, all the words that you've spoken, all the decisions that you've made, studies show that on average a person makes upwards of 35,000 decisions in a day. At least 200 of those are related to food. But to say that it will be, even when we waited, it's 50-50 exactly poised, how likely is it? It sounds ridiculous. How likely is it that the entire world is 50-50 exactly? All the time people are doing things. And even if it is 50-50, how long is it going to be 50-50 for? Maybe a second, maybe a split second. Then somebody did something good, somebody did something bad, it's changing all the time. To say that the entire world, to say that even for one individual, think about the sum total of everything that we've done, to say that it's poised exactly 50-50 sounds very, very strange. And I ask you, how likely is it that there is anybody in this room who, if everything is weighted up, will be exactly 50-50? I think it's very unlikely. How likely is it there is anybody in the world who fits into that it's exactly 50-50? Again, the Gemara said, Le'olam ya'adam atzmo ke'ilu chetzio chayav. View yourself as if it is, because it probably won't happen. It probably won't fit. How likely is it that in the history of mankind there has ever been a person who was exactly 50-50 for a substantial period of time? Maybe once. Maybe there was somebody somewhere. So the Sefer Beinonim, our understanding is now flipped. At least mine has. I hope you agree with me. But we said most people are probably Beinonim. And then we thought about it, and we said if a Beinoni means that it's what you've done on this side of the scale and that side of the scale, it's exactly 50-50 for a substantial period of time, it stays there, that's probably very unlikely, i.e. most people are not Beinonim. Now the question is much greater. The Sefer Beinonim is not just here for 10 days a year. The Sefer Beinonim is out of commission. So what's going on? What is the Gemara trying to tell us? And why should we view ourselves as if we are a Beinoni if it's something which is impossible to achieve? That's question number 1. Question number 2 goes like this. Let's read the Rambam. Rambam, source number 4, Ilchot Shuvah, Perek Gimel, says the Rambam in Halacha Aleph. Kol echad ve'echad mibnei adam yesh lo zchuyot ve'avonot. Every single person, every single individual has merits and sins. Misha zchuyotav Yeterot al avonotav, tzaddik. Again, notice we're not talking here about a tzaddik gamur. There are different manuscripts, different girsaot, in which maybe the word gamur does not appear in the Gemara either. The Rambam doesn't say gamur, it just says tzaddik. If you have more mitzvot, you have more zchuyot, you have more merits, you are righteous. Umisha avonotav yeterot al zchuyotav, rasha. And vice versa, you are considered wicked. Mechza la mechza beinoni. Right? If it's half and half, you're a Beinoni. There's the Rambam. He says it explicitly, what we've been explaining for the last 10 minutes, based on the Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara in Kiddushin did not say, this is a Beinoni, but that's how the Rambam learned. V'chein hamdina, v'chein kol ha'olam. So too for an individual, so too for a community, so too for the entire world. Let's skip to Halacha Gimel for the moment. In Halacha Gimel, the Rambam says, Kshem sheshoklin zchuyot adam ve'avonotav b'shat mitato. He says, when does this accounting take place? After a person dies. Then everything's weighed up, what they've done in their life. But he says, Kach b'kol shana v'shana. This takes place every year as well, Rosh Hashanah time. Shoklin avonot kol echad ve'echad mibei ha'olam im zchuyotav. We weigh up the sins versus the merits. B'yom tov shel Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah. Mi shenimtza tzadik nechtam lechayim. Mi shenimtza rasha nechtam lemita. Sounds familiar. This is the Gemara in source number 2. The Rambam he has quoting almost verbatim. But then he says, Beinoni tolin oto ad Yom Kippurim. The Beinoni waits until Yom Kippur. This we know, this is what the Gemara says exactly. And then he says something slightly different. Says the Rambam, Im asa tshuva nechtam lechayim, ve'im lav nechtam lemita. If he did tshuva, he'll be signed, he'll be sealed for life. And if not, he'll be signed for death. Now go back to the Gemara in source number 2, the last line, it's in bold and it's underlined. Up until this point, the Rambam is quoting the Gemara almost verbatim, but here he changes. The Gemara said, Zachu nichtavim lachayim, lo zachu nichtavim lemita. Said the Gemara, what does this Beinoni have to do in order to merit life? Well, it doesn't tell us, but it says Zachu, he merits. Comes the Rambam and he says, no, it's not enough just Zachu, it's im asa tshuva, you have to do tshuva. So for the purposes of this, since we haven't yet answered our first question, let's stick for the moment with our understanding of the Beinoni. That it's a person who's exactly 50-50. And again, if you're poised exactly 50-50, zchuyot on the one hand, avonot on the other hand, what do you have to do in order to tip the scale onto either side? Whatever you want. But whatever you do, the next action that person takes is going to tip the scales. So if you want to be your Beinoni and you want to become a tzaddik, just do one good action. Give tzedakah, speak nicely to somebody, don't speak lashon hara, learn some Torah, go and do some davening, put on tefillin, listen to the shofar and Rosh Hashanah, whatever it is. One action. Does it have to be tshuva? There's no reason why it has to be tshuva. So that's why the Gemara says, Zachu nichtavim lachayim. But comes along the Rambam and he says, no, it has to be tshuva. It can't be anything. It has to be im asa tshuva nechtam lachayim, im lav nechtam lemita. And the question is why? Again, the Rambam gave us the same definition of who the Beinoni is. He said it's somebody who's got 50-50. So you want to go from 50-50 to one side having more, then you need to do one thing, add to that side of the scales. It can be anything. It can be whatever you want. Why does it have to be tshuva? So those are our 2 questions that I want to try and answer. Now, question number 1 is, who is this Beinoni and what does it mean? Number 2 is, why did the Rambam change the language? Why did he say it has to be tshuva and no other mitzvah is good enough? So Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer of Taos, he asks this question. And he gives the following answer. The answer he gives is based on the Gemara in source number 5 in Masechet Yomah. And he says like this. Let's read the story. Let's read the story of the Gemara. Gemara says, Rav havalei milta b'adi ha'utavcha. Rav, the great sage, had a havalei milta. You know, there was a certain individual, a certain tavach, a certain butcher, who had offended Rav. He had insulted him, he had slighted him, he had done something against him. We don't know what. The context of this Gemara is about asking for appeasement, asking for forgiveness before Yom Kippur. And I'll say it outside. But Rav expected this person, he was waiting for him to come and apologize. The Gemara says, a Shulchan Aruch paskins, a person should not be cruel. Somebody else comes and asks you for forgiveness, so you should grant them forgiveness. And Rav was willing to do that. But the person didn't show up. So it was Erev Yom Kippur, and Rav said, you know what, he's not showing up to me. I'll make it easy for him. Maybe he's busy, maybe he's at work, he can't come, he forgot, he doesn't know. But if he sees me standing there in front of him, so then he'll ask forgiveness. And then I'll earn twice, I'll be able to forgive him. And this person won't have this on his head, that he's insulted one of the Gdolei Ador. So Rav goes along, and on the way he meets Rav Huna. And Rav Huna says, where are you going? And Rav tells him, I'm going to this butcher, I'm going to allow him to ask for forgiveness. And he goes, and Rav Huna says, Rav's on his way to kill him. So what happens? Rav arrives at this place. Gemara doesn't tell us why. But Rav arrives, and he stands there, and this butcher is cutting the, Gemara describes, he's chopping up the meat. And he looks up, and he says, oh, it's you, it's Rav. He says, yes, it's me, it's Rav. And he puts his head down, and he carries on chopping the meat. And Rav is standing there. The Gemara doesn't tell us exactly the dialogue that took place between them, but we can fill in the gaps. And Rav says, do you have anything to say to me? And the butcher says, no, I don't have anything to say to you. And Rav walks away. And as he's chopping the meat, one of the bones goes up and chokes him to death. The butcher. So Rav Huna said, Rav's on his way to kill this person, and the person died. But what's going on? Where did this come from? So Rav Yitzchak Blazer explains. He says, this person, he had insulted Rav. He hadn't asked him for forgiveness. Okay, he might have had an excuse. He might have been busy. He might have forgotten. He may have not been able to get to him. It can be excused. But when Rav, the Gadol Hador, is standing there right in front of you, and all you have to do is stand up and say, I'm sorry. That's it. And you don't do that, well, that's inexcusable. When you have the opportunity, when he's right there, when he's made himself available, why aren't you saying sorry? Why aren't you asking for forgiveness? There's no excuse. He's here. So he says, when it comes to us, and it comes to Aseret Yemei Tshuva, if you turn over the page, source number 6 is the Rambam again in Hilchot Tshuva. He says, Af al pi she'atshuva v'atzaka yafeh le'olam, tshuva, tzaka, which is tefillah, are appropriate always. But b'asara yamim sheben Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim hu yafa b'yoter, then it's even more appropriate. It's even more beautiful. Umitkabelet miyad, and it is accepted immediately. Shneimar Yeshua Hashem b'himatzor. Yeshua Hashem b'himatzor. Seek Hashem when He can be found. He can be found now in these 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In other words, if a person doesn't do tshuva in the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that is not neutral. If you're currently on 50-50 and you don't do tshuva, you're tipping the scales in the wrong direction, because now you have an opportunity that you didn't have the rest of the year. Now you have an obligation that you didn't have to the same extent the rest of the year. And therefore, if whatever other mitzvot that you are doing, the fact that you have not done tshuva at that point is going to outweigh it, is going to tip the scales in the wrong direction. And that is why, says Rabbi Yitzchak Blazer, that is why the Rambam says you have to do tshuva. If you're a Beinoni, that's the only way to become a tzaddik. But let's suggest something else. Let's suggest something else, which is because that maybe answers our second question. It does not do anything to answer our first question. And to answer our first question, we go to the Pachad Yitzchak, we go to Rav Hutner. And Rav Hutner says a beautiful idea over here. It's really written in the Rambam. If you look deep enough and long enough, you'll find it there as well. But what Rav Hutner suggests is this. He says our whole image, our whole symbolism of this, exactly 50-50, it's counting up. It's how many things did you do that were good, and how many things did you do that were bad. That's not what's happening here. That's not the judgment. That's not the accounting. That's not what these books are about. A Beinoni is not somebody who has done 34 mitzvot which are worth 2 points and 34 averot which are worth 2 points as well. That's not what it is. What it is, he says, is a definition of who you are. What it is a quality, is a characteristic that a person has. The example he gives, let's say we have a person who has the quality of kas, a person who is an angry person. What defines that person, whether we say they're an angry person, is not how many times in a day they got angry. Oftentimes it matches up. But they might be having a very good day in which they did not get angry once. Does that mean they are not an angry person? No, it just means today they didn't get angry, but their midah, their quality in their nefesh, is one of anger. To the contrary, you have a person who is a very patient person, and they didn't sleep last night, and they're upset with their kids, and whatever happened. And 25 times in a day they lost their temper. Does it mean they are not a patient person? No, it means that they lost their temper 25 times. But there's a great difference between an angry person who loses his temper and a patient person who loses one's temper. And vice versa. And therefore, says Rav Hutner, I'm not going to read it all inside now, it's on the source sheet number 8, you can see it on your own time. But he says that is what the Rambam is talking about. That is what the Gemara is talking about when it says rubo zchuyot v'rubo avonot. A person who is majority mitzvot or a person who is majority averot, it's not how many things that they've done, but it's what defines them, what's inside them, what's the quality that is leading them on. And source number 7, which I'm sure you've all realized, that says Masechet